So we've been doing the retrospective thing, 500 episodes after 10 years. We're revisiting, not in depth necessarily. Sometimes we are. Each episode, each fucking movie, bringing the shit back to you, going through the archives, Libsyn, the Watch This with RickRamos.libsyn.com archive. We're going to do this process in order to get back to where we are now. Last time we ended talking about Mulholland Drive, Sunset Boulevard, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. This kind of like noirish vibe to that. Right now we're in April of in April of 2022.
Yeah, you went a little bit farther back.
Discussing the 1940s, more than hard boiled. This is a genre and an era that you like to live in. You like to visit. You like to hunt. You go and hunt that area.
I don't know what it is about it. I mean, I think that would take sitting down, and I think you would comment more on me. I don't know. I think it's hard to take a step back and see yourself for what you are, but movies say a lot about you. And when you hear the movies that a person likes, it gives you a kind of an insight into who that person you're talking to is. So I guess with the cynicism and the hard-edged kind of cynical attitudes about America and societal roles, it says a lot about me and my opinions and views, and there's a darkness that either exists within me or a darkness that I'm trying to portray. I'm not really sure. Maybe it's a mixture of both, but there is something about the hard-boiled 1940s that I like losers, and I like people who are doing what they have to do in order to fight against the system and fight against themselves in some cases. The Mitchums, the Danduriers, and all these characters, ex-cops, private detectives, people who just find themselves in really shitty situations in some cases out of greed, but sometimes just misfortune. You get this sense of a bleaker America, which I think maybe is extreme, but also is a little bit more in keeping with the world as it actually exists. Maybe that's to my detriment. I don't know. I would need you to comment on that to give me any kind of perspective. Yeah.
It's one of those, like, what came first, RickRamos or the 40s? And I don't know if, like, you know, that goes to why does anyone gravitate towards what they gravitate towards, right? It's something speaks to them, and so it's kind of like, once that first initial thing speaks to you, do you dive in more deeply and then therefore like grab a hold of other elements of that thing, and take that, or how does that work? You know what I mean? And so it's kind of like, if we were to drop you in the 40s, give you that trench coat with the collar up and give you that fucking hat tilted and the cigarette and the dames and whatnot, would you fit right in, or would it be like, nah, I'm not really, I don't want to live here. I just want to visit this from the future. I don't know.
Neither do I. There's two of us.
That was part of the series that we were doing on going through, it was a lot of fun to go through each decade and look at what were the films that we think defined or kind of like signaled the things that mattered in that culturally in that decade. And so in the 40s, obviously there was a lot of black and white and a lot of noir, a lot of smoke and a lot of shadow. So it is something that is a world unto itself to go back and revisit.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. After that, we did Regina King's One Night in Miami about 1964, fucking 60 years ago. This moment when Sam Cooke, Jim Brown, Malcolm X, and Cassius Clay, who would become Muhammad Ali, they met in a fucking motel room in Miami to just. It was this kind of this. We gave the title of the episode "Black Summit '64." Just this moment when all these different figures in Black America of the mid '60s just kind of intersected, and how their intersection was basically the intersection of all of these things happening in America. It's weird because right now the DNC is happening, and there are protests because of Gaza happening outside, and those who do know their history, it's hard to not think of '68 and fucking the protests and the pushback is like, well, this is not fucking '68. We're not gonna elect Nixon by doing this. But how do we know, right? So it's just interesting to go back to that episode, to go back the way we're doing it. Everything's going back, but also looking forward. It's very strange.
Well, that's definitely one of the more powerful things about cinema is that it the commentary that it makes, the understanding of the times in which it depicts, but also the commentary on the time in which something is being made, and a look towards the future. And that was I think that was a very, I don't think it was it wasn't a great film, but it was a very good film in depicting a fictionalized account of what those conversations between those four men might have been like. Jim Brown, the Cleveland Browns football player that would become an icon of both sports, film, and civil rights. Sam Cooke, the balladeer who was struggling with a sense of purpose. It's one thing to have the talent that Sam Cooke had. It's another thing to find yourself utilizing that talent for a greater good. And it was interesting to hear how Bob Dylan would play into that conversation as, in the sense that I got was Bob Dylan, a white man, a Jewish white man, taking on a mantle and making a commentary on something that a black artist should be taking the lead on. With that was the time of the times they are a changing, and Sam Cooke would, I guess, answer or follow up with his own kind of version with
A Change is
Gonna Come. Probably one of the most beautiful songs ever recorded, I think. Personally, I think it's one of the great songs. And he infuses it with such passion and a spirit of hope that I, for one, am pretty much incapable of having. But there are moments when you hear something like that where you're just like, you start, I'm sorry, it sounds cheesy as all fuck, but you hear something like that and you do believe in the possibility of change, however unlikely.
I mean, I laugh not because of the idea of a change may come. I laugh because you're like, I'm incapable of such things as change,
Well, you've known me a long time. You know the only time that I'm actually in love is when I hear John Lee Hooker and Van Morrison sitting on that fucking waterfront smoking cigarettes and drinking coffee, waiting for a bitch to show up that ain't never gonna come, But I believe in love.
For the lockdowns.
Yeah.
When fucking, When Van Morrison is waiting for the lockdown to come, when he's singing with Eric Clapton about vaccines, it chokes me up every time.
We're talking about a different time. We're talking about a different Van. Before he was that crazy, when he still had soul, when he still had a spirit in him. But you know exactly what I mean, where you hear something like that, or at least you understand that I believe in love for the 6.5 minutes that song plays. It sounds fucking extreme and exaggerated, but it's true. It's true.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. Chain Gang is more like your centric song, but
yeah,
you're not really Wonderful World or Cupid or it's more you're just kind of twisting the night away on that Chain Gang, you know. Anyway, so from there we went into Jim and Andy and Man on the Moon.
Yeah, that was a little bit of a problem, if I recall correctly.
It was just fucking to see the blur between fact and fiction, and to see. Since then, Jim Carrey just makes these appearances, and he just seems kind of like this pseudo enlightened madman, who's kind of like above it all and seems to like not really give a fuck about anything. And he's like, I have a beard and I see it for what it is, and I'm just kind of lighthearted and like we're gonna move on.
Well, that's a big factor in his character and what he's become, in this sense of no longer caring about. I don't know if that's the right description, but seeming to no longer care. I don't know, to seem not defeated so much as just tired and no longer interested in making a difference in this, you know, but not to the way that Carlin would become with finding himself divorced from the species, which I thought was a little bit more poetic. A stance to take. I think the thing with the Jim and Andy documentary, number one, I think both of us liked certain aspects of Man on the Moon, but didn't feel like it really. I just felt like it seemed too much like Jim Carrey falling into I remember doing the episode and thinking that Jim Carrey's performance and Jim Carrey's behavior, both on and off the set, screamed of being a little bit too self-aggrandizing. I mean, a little bit too self-consumed. And this idea of, I am Andy. Andy has taken over me. In a lot of respects, I think maybe he believes that, or he believed that about himself. But I think Andy Kaufman never really bought into the bullshit that he was doing in the same way that Jim Carrey bought into it, believing that he had become Andy Kaufman. I think Andy Kaufman always knew it was a goof, always knew that he was fucking with people in a way, and I think that was the most interesting aspect of what he did and created. It was comedy. It was the comedy of being able to use people's perception against them, or what they come to expect, you know? Yeah.
I am also cynical, but I am capable of change. I'll just do it tomorrow.
Yeah.
I hope. See, that's what I have.
Yeah.
Change will come tomorrow. I think that Jim Carrey is also one of those fucking edgelords that's like trolling the audience. But his greatest troll is to make us think that he doesn't realize that he's trolling. You know what I mean? Like, that he actually did go crazy. Which, I mean, I don't fucking know. It's how much of it is this is just all marketing. You know what I mean? Like, it's all myth, and it's all like created by him, including his whole thing of like, well, this is where I'm at in my, and again, like the blur of that is like, this is where he's at in life through all of the tragedies and all the different weird shit that he's been through and done. But then how much of that is he also like turning that into a bit, into this absurd bit? And you know what? I'm going to just fucking like just go on these, whenever I do interviews, I'm just going to fucking kind of like pull back the curtain. And that's part of like, there's still a curtain behind that curtain that I pull back, but that's part of what my thing is going to be now, is that I'm going to just pull back the curtain and just be like, yeah, I'm just not into it. I'm just not, you know, whatever his take is that I'm not going to struggle for people's like admiration and like Hollywood. And I'm not going to just like scramble for Hollywood anymore. I'm just kind of like over it. I see it for what it is. In other words, like he's his own form of like red pill. You know what I mean? Like he's Neo, and he sees the Matrix. But at the same time, I'm kind of like, is he just another manifestation of the Matrix? Also, like, and he knows that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So the who's to say and who's to care? From there, we moved on to, we did a little documentary on Cypress Hill.
That you fought. You fought it a little bit.
Why? How did I? Just tell me how I fought it.
You fought it. Who the fuck cares about that? That was. I kind of had to talk you into that one.
Oh, okay. Now this sounds kind of familiar.
Yeah, you didn't want to do it because I think
was that the hatred of my own city,
and that's what you said when we were talking about it. Yeah, the
sense of about where I come from.
Exactly.
Man?
Yeah. And I said, watch the fucking documentary, and there were moments in it where I remember, if a seminal group of the 1990s coming from an area that I believed my idea for it, we probably wouldn't have done the episode if you weren't from that neighborhood, specifically that neighborhood. And there was a moment where I pointed out to you, that I saw it, that there was a cross street that was your cross street. Or at least it was right there, not too far from where you were. They showed a
Greenspan.
Yeah, that's what it was. And I just fucking...
it's nearby.
No, not Greenspan. There was a street sign.
Something that you knew.
Yeah, something that I recognized. I was like, holy shit, that's where that fucker lives. That's right there. That's I've been there. I know that spot, and I know somebody who comes from it. And so there was one aspect, there were a couple of different aspects that I found very interesting, is that they were probably the last group that I really embraced. They were the last hip hop group that I really embraced, and they were the end of my hip hop period. They were basically it. 90, 91, 92, whatever that was, when How I Could Just Kill a Man dropped, when that first album hit, it made me fall in love with hip hop again for that 2 or 3 year period right before I went to college, and then that couple of years that I was in college when Cypress Hill hit, then Black Sunday, then Temples of Boom, I think it was, or I can't remember the chronology of the albums, but I thought it was fascinating to know that you grew up in that area, and I was really interested in doing an episode on your perspective of what they performed, but also their attitude and their reflections on it. So I thought it was a good episode. I thought it was very
it's just crazy to think back and I mean, because it sounds rather obvious, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like why would you not? And then even right now you're like, you fought it, and I'm like, really? Like, well, tell me how I fought it. And then you're like telling me, and I'm like, wait a minute, that sounds vaguely familiar. That sense of shame that I've put back in its place deep in the basement of my city. And I'm like, oh shit, yeah, I think I did feel like, who gives a fuck?
Yeah.
And it's kind of like one of those things where it's like, well, like, it's not that people give a fuck about any specific place at any specific time, but it's kind of like, well, if you're gonna talk, it's like, let's say I was born on the Lower East Side, right, in New York, and it's kind of like, obviously, I mean, that has more cultural like significance, and but let's say even then, like I'm like, come on, get out of here, like no one, like whatever, like come on, and then someone's like, no, like come on, you know. Then you start getting deeper, and it's like, well, a lot of times the personal is what really reflects the universal.
Yeah.
And people, you know, versus starting with the universal, which is fucking generic, right? It's being able to understand how the story of this little fucking group can be the story of any little fucking group from anywhere. You know what I mean? Whether it's Bristol in the fucking UK or some assholes from fucking Queens, the Ramones, or whatever, right?
Yeah.
So but it's just interesting also that, and now from a perspective of like podcasting, because we want to talk about that in this process as well. It's kind of like when you're talking about material that you want to talk about, it's also like, wow, like how things will, how do you edit yourself, but also like from a psychological place, and like, why would I not want to talk about that? And why would it be like, well, who cares? So that I just find that interesting. That how easily it was that I forgot that.
Yeah.
So, okay. But I mean, good call. That fucking like like depending on how hard I fought against you, like I'm glad you fucking kept fighting, and I'm glad you don't change and don't back down and are rigid and inflexible. Because you won for Engine's Bed. We're better off for it.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, because we did that looking one episode that mattered so much, you know? Episode 382. Episode 383 was George Carlin. We've gone to that George Carlin well like multiple times, and we will continue to.
It's a testament to his importance within the culture. Is that you can't imagine stand-up comedy without George Carlin. There's two names that stick out for people of just about any generation. That's Richard Pryor and George Carlin. And those who know comedy remember Lenny Bruce and the doors, the barriers that he broke down. And we did an episode on Lenny that we talked about a couple of weeks ago or last week. I can't remember when. We talked a little bit about it, but you had two people basically Pryor with the confessional, with the personal confessional on stage, and how deep you could go within the self to find the humor. And that's something that I don't think we will ever stop going back to. At least I will always take us back there on some level, because it's that important to me. Carlin did it from a different perspective, where it was the macro, and it was the species as a whole. So it was the power of language. It was the power of cultural indoctrination through religion, through government. And I don't think you can downplay his importance in both definitely stand-up comedy, but also the culture, because even people, and he's been dead maybe 13 or 14 years now, I think 2011, something like that. I can't remember exactly. Pryor was 2005, 2006, something like that. But, and I might be completely wrong on both of those things, but I know that the world of stand-up comedy, whether people who are doing it now are just starting out or whatever, regardless of how aware they are of the history of stand-up comedy, George Carlin is in the fabric of it. The ability to say certain things, talk about topics, a lot of it is getting lost today in certain cultural sensitivities and political correctness that go into what we do and how we speak to one another and how we treat one another. But there was a moment there where there was a level of honesty that both Pryor and Carlin, in their own respective ways, brought us. And I don't think stand-up comedy, I don't think humor, I don't think the art, whether it be stand-up or film and writing, I don't think they would be the same without those two men.
I wonder what you think
Mm-hmm.
Carlin would have thought of, like, where we're at in terms of it's one thing, the political correctness thing comes from the 90s, and that was and he was on Bill Maher from the Political Correct show. He was, all that. That's one aspect of that. But for example, take what's his name? The one who's always making jokes about trans.
Chappelle or Ricky Gervais?
Chappelle. Okay. Yeah. No, Chappelle. I mean, Gervais to another extent, but I mean, like Chappelle, like, let's say something like that. Like, what do you think? What do you think Carlin would have? Because you included in that is like what we say, what we talk about, but also how we treat each other. What do you think? And I just want pure speculation, like based on what
it would only be pure speculation, but based on my understanding, I know.
Feel free to just go crazy with it.
But based on that, I think Carlin. Okay, knowing Carlin the way I knew Carlin, which is as a fan basically, but as a student. And you also remember that people evolve over time. Some experience changes people, but Carlin had a pretty good through line in what I would view as rational thinking. And I think he was a traditionalist when it came to comedy, which is to say that he was focused on exposing ugly truths and really commenting on absurdity. And the absurdity that we find ourselves facing right not self-awareness, but this level of entitlement and sense of self-importance that we feel we have and we deserve. At the end of the day, Carlin was about hitting both sides as hard as he could based on the ridiculousness of what they were trying to say about themselves. He didn't like the idea of anybody taking themselves too seriously or seeing themselves as anything more than the upright walking and talking monkeys that we are. And I think that's the important thing. I think he understood. I think he understood that there is a need to recognize the importance of the individual, but also to understand the necessity of living together as a community. And all of the struggles that entails. I think he knew. I think he was rational. I mean, he made a lot of comments that I think were a little bit too far. I mean, he was dismissive of a lot of things that I didn't necessarily agree with. But for the most part, I would say 85 to 90% of the shit that he said on those albums and in those HBO specials, I agreed with. And 100% of what he said, I believed he had the right to say. Now, when you bring up a guy like Dave Chappelle, people aren't hearing exactly what Chappelle is saying. Chappelle isn't going after trans people and I don't know if you've seen the specials that he's done and the jokes that he's done about trans people. It's not so much hitting trans people for being trans or not liking who they are or not respecting them or not undermining their humanity. What he is saying is he's commenting on the embracing of the trans movement in contrast to the dismissal of the black experience. So it's more along the lines of, you don't give a fuck about black people, but you're going to go over there and it's all open arms and hugs, and the idea that biological men and women, what that supposedly means, and in a weird way, the contrast between what is occurring versus what we've been taught and what we've been raised to believe. I don't think Carlin would have had so much of a problem with what he was saying. He might have thought that the jokes were a little bit easier in some sense, but I think Carlin would have supported him in every respect. I think what Carlin would have really been disgusted with was the level of as little as he thought about politics, voting, and government as a whole. I think he would be looking at the current state and just be either completely disgusted or sad. Because as cynical as he was, I don't think he could have ever imagined something like this happening.
Well, I imagine him. I agree. I mean, I agree. I think he would have talked shit about Donald Trump acting like a stand-up comic on fucking at his rallies, because that's basically what he's doing. He does like these weird bits, and then there's the level of people getting. I think he would have come from the perspective, and I know his shit a lot less than you do. Obviously, this is from part of your world. I imagine that he would have zeroed in on the fact that the so-called powers that be, him coming from that perspective, they want us to fight about these culture war issues as a distraction against other areas where we're all getting fucked over, which are more governmental, economic, kind of going back to what you say in terms of it's like the class shit that fucking we need to focus on, because the billionaires are amassing the greatest transfers of fucking wealth, while we're arguing over fucking bathrooms and who's gonna go where and fucking what we call ourselves and what we call each other, which can be sorted out later. You know what I mean? I also I want to ask the same question about Rogan, because Rogan just had that. Obviously, he's had this through the pandemic, and over the last few years, as many podcasters and many kind of people, whether originally coming from that intellectual dark web or fucking Russell Brand, another comic, he turned fucking he made this hard right fucking turn through the anti-vax pipeline, and a lot of these characters who have podcasts are online on these different platforms. Maybe they started out just or seem to have started out just doing these interviews. There's this entrepreneur asshole multi-level marketing pyramid scheme guy named Patrick Bet-David. Started out from what I remember him, he was just doing interviews with mafia guys and maybe sports people and Secret Service guys or whatever, and then it became this fucking right wing channel, and it I don't know how much of it it became, or how much of it was exposed, or they brought it up themselves for financial reasons. Rogan, going back to him, just came out with that Burn the Boats Netflix special, and I've already there's this fucking I'm gonna promote it, not promote it, but I'm gonna mention it because I thought it was really interesting. There's this guy, and it seems to be getting a lot of traction online. So we're going to get into that conversation, although we will not benefit from it, because we're just telling our one friend,
Yeah.
Basically, there's this channel on YouTube called Elephant Graveyard.
I've heard about this. Yeah.
You've heard of this?
Yeah, I've heard of it.
Yeah, he. I don't know. Have you seen the video?
No.
It's like a 20 minutes to half an hour video where he like goes into how it can be like it's like something along the lines of like the death of fucking like, is this the death of Joe Rogan's like comedy career? And he does this armchair psychological fucking like look at Rogan's special, which goes into how potentially Rogan like stole jokes, which means he fucking basically went the route of Mencia, who fucking Joe Rogan not started out, but like gained traction by attacking, Mencia and all that. The same kind of rehashing of his own old material, the bag of fucking like typical topics, which is like psychedelics, aliens, the moon landing, Bigfoot, COVID, that type of like bullshit, weed, like the Rogan subject matter, based on Rogan's positioning, like now in the culture, in the podcast world, Spotify, all this, what do you think Carlin would have, what would have been his take on that stuff?
On all of those topics, or on Rogan himself?
Whatever you want. I mean,
I think Carlin's
contrasted to Rogan.
Mm-hmm. I think Carlin's issue was the same thing that I have and this is to prop myself up a little bit, but it's the idea that Rogan's not the problem. Rogan is
symptom, basically.
Well, I guess maybe in a way he's a symptom of the problem, but the real problem with a Joe Rogan Experience podcast is the fact that there are people out there who embrace this in a way that they don't give any thought to it. They just accept it because if you can speak forcefully and if you can sell an idea with a level of confidence, then you can get across something. I used to say it all the time. The lie you tell somebody only has to be as good as the lie the person wants to believe. That's all you have to do, And I'm not saying that Joe Rogan is necessarily lying, but Joe Rogan is definitely putting out bullshit that he can't necessarily verify. He's not a fucking scientist. He's not any kind of a great scholar. He's not a doctor of medicine in any way. He's a podcaster. Before that, he was a stand-up comic, and before that, he was an amateur mixed martial artist fighter. Whether or not, I don't know. The problem is when you have a platform, and I used to say this back when Oprah Winfrey had her show. I hated Oprah for a long time. I just couldn't stand her. And then I realized I don't hate Oprah Winfrey as much. You quickly begin to hate these people because they buy into their own bullshit. They buy into their own self-importance. You can see that with
Dr. Frankenstein.
That's right.
That created fucking Dr. Phil.
Exactly. Well, yeah. There's that Dr. Phil and Dr. Oz. So I mean, this bitch is evil. But Joe Rogan created Tony Hinchcliffe and Tom Segura and Bert Kreischer and Ari Shaffir and a lot of other all mediocre comics and some better comics than others, but not necessarily the importance that they deserve. But the problem is not necessarily them. It's the people who are so bereft of either common sense or not necessarily intelligence, but a curiosity for the truth. So that they think that just because Joe Rogan says it, and he says it with the level of force that they wish they could say, they're going to buy into it. So it's the cult of personality. It's the idea that you can elevate a certain person up to a level where now they're more important than they once were. Who the fuck was Oprah? Who the fuck is Joe Rogan? I mean, at least with people like Richard Dawkins or Christopher Hitchens or Noam Chomsky, Howard Zinn, these are people that are respected because they've earned a certain level of respect based on their education, their research, their whether you agree with any of those guys or not. And there's a lot.
And they also knew how to make noise in a certain place as well.
Well, yeah.
Especially Hitchens and Dawkins.
Yeah. Yeah, but you do know that when you listen to Hitchens and you listen to Dawkins, there's a level of intelligence there, whether you agree with what they're saying or disagree with what they're saying. And I agreed with a lot and disagreed with a lot of what both of those men say, or, with Hitchens, what he said. I'm a great admirer of both of those men. However, to blanketly take what they say as scripture, if you
gospel,
will,
especially atheists.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's dangerous. And so when you have an Oprah, who I don't know what her background is that I should listen to her on that level. And I know Rogan does not have a background that I should be paying attention to him. I think anybody who pays attention and listens to Rogan, I think anybody who bases their life on his rants and teachings is a fucking moron. I'm sorry, that's what it is, I mean, yeah, he's funny in some respects, and he does have some interesting guests and some conversations. And in the beginning, at least, it was like, I just want to hear what this fucking guy says. Oh, the Holocaust didn't occur? All right, come on, let me hear, because I like to hear.
Well, I mean, that's what we would listen to Alex Jones.
We would listen to Alex Jones for the craziness of it. Mm-hmm.
Because it was not like, it's not like we were donating money to fucking Prison Planet and having that bumper sticker, or because the war is the war for your mind or whatever. Yeah. And I remember some of those slogans, but it's just kind of like, it goes back to Slackers, which we've talked about. We've never done an episode on, where there's a or actually it's not Slackers, I think it's Waking Life, a link later, where there's a section with Alex Jones, because it's the Austin stuff, and way before Rogan moved to Austin, this is fucking 90s shit, and there's a red-faced fucking cartoon or whatever kind of animation it is of Alex Jones fucking ranting and raving.
It's called rotoscoping. They film the actual person and then they animate over the image. Yeah.
Right. So yeah, I mean, and in terms of his comedy, that's kind of how we got into this. Because this is kind of like more open, because it's, we're touching all these topics rather than just broadening out from one fucking film, but jumping off from George Carlin, and it's kind of like how would George Carlin have been on Rogan? You know what I mean? Like, would he have gone? Would he have pushed back, or would Rogan just be a fucking fanboy to fucking Carlin? Like,
Rogan probably would have been a fanboy. Rogan, I mean, because at the end of the day, Rogan is a comic. Rogan comes out of the Comedy Store, and there is that reverence for those that have come before him, and you can see it in certain, like, Joe will pull back when he's with a comic who's better than him. If you've seen him on with Bill Burr, yeah, Bill Burr is a much better comic than Joe Rogan. But what Bill Burr does is Bill Burr is fearless in his attacks on people, where he he's the ultimate ball breaker. If you get into it, Bill Burr might be wrong on some cases, but he's not going to back down. And you like the fact that he's just. There was a moment in one of the podcasts where Rogan wants to start talking about the CDC and masks and everything, and Bill Burr shuts him down. He's like, "I'm not going to talk to you about this." And he was like, "Come on, let's talk about it." He was like, "No, I'm not going to talk with no medical degree to another guy with no medical degree as we sit here smoking cigars on what the CDC, the choices that they made." I think, and Carlin also did the bit about blindly following government orders. So I don't know what he would have done about the masks. It would have been an interesting, because he had the bit about fortifying his immune system when he was a kid because they lived such a rough life. You had to build your immune system to. But I think he was a realistic kind of guy. I think he was the kind of guy that says, well, you know what? It's a fucked up world, and sometimes you have to make concessions. You have to realize that the game changes and the pieces get replaced, and you have to move in a different direction. You have to adapt to what is around you. The thing with Carlin is, and I still subscribe to it, is understanding tribalism, but being able to step away from it. It's the old Groucho Marx line of, I wouldn't want to be a member of a club that would have me as a member. Mm-hmm. And I think that's very important. I think that's very important is understanding the importance of the individual, but understanding the need to become part of a community when it's necessary. I think Carlin understood that in a way that a Joe Rogan is incapable of. Because Joe Rogan is so popular at this point that he has nobody telling him when he should pull back or when he is wrong, or maybe he shouldn't go down that route. Carlin always found the humor in it, but also always knew not everything is correct. Things change. I think he would be disgusted with 2024 and the level of. He would embrace the idea of transgenderism, but he would also belittle the people for thinking that they're so self-important, that pronouns matter, and that your identity has to be something that I automatically know and embrace. You get what I'm saying with that?
Yeah, I do get it.
Yeah. And I think that's what, and that's kind of the way I see it. I was like, be whatever the fuck you want, but don't expect me to automatically know. And as far as what you want to be called, if I know you, yeah, okay, you're a man and you want to live your life as a woman, I'll call you she. All right, I'll call you by your fucking woman name. But you can't expect me to just fucking know that. Yeah. Am I?
Yeah, you're a man, but you want me to pretend you're a woman. So fine, I'll do that.
Well, in a way, sometimes. But that's the thing that going back to the whole Chappelle comparison is that you have to understand that my view on something doesn't necessarily jibe with yours, and the concession sometimes is the best that you can hope for. Because the truth is, I really don't care. Yeah,
because change is not going to come.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So it's like
it's dead. You got killed.
Yeah. Look, I respect a person at a hotel fucking somebody he should have been fucking, but yeah, but see that's part of the problem with our world is that we've reached the point where everybody imagines that they're. Just look at the way people talk. My journey, my struggle, my and it's like that's the fucking human experience. Yeah,
everybody's the fucking main character. Supposedly.
Yeah, exactly.
But, and that's the ego. That's how we fucking That's how we exist. As each of us we live in the subjective experience.
Yeah, but you know what? We talk for about an hour every time that we talk before we start recording. We talk for about an hour about how fucked up our lives are, because that's essentially what it is. You and me bitching about our.
Wait a minute. I don't fucking talk. I don't think my life has its moments where it sucks.
No. What I'm talking specifically about the job. I'm talking about the job.
Okay, well, the job.
Okay, so that's, and when I say the life, it's like we're complaining, but it's you and I are complaining about basically the same thing.
We
with different, yeah. No, I mean it's
exactly.
It's like when my mom complains, like, your dad says I'm always bitching. Well, you are always bitching, but it's not a bad thing. Sometimes you got to get that shit out. Sometimes if you don't, that shit's going to turn into cancer. You got to be able to talk about the shit that's bothering you. But the point that I'm trying to make is that you and I work at different places, and the experiences are different, but the gist is the same. It's the struggle with the authority, the expectations, and the possibilities of what the job provide. And I think that's if I imagined that I was the only one going through this shit, I would be a cunt. I'm not a cunt. I'm a guy who knows I'm not the only. This ain't my story. You know what I mean? This is my version of the story.
Right. The difference is that it's like you care about yours more.
Absolutely.
Because it's you.
It's mine. Yeah.
Because that's your. It's like, well, when you're on your deathbed, and I hope, as my friend, I hope that your death is one of those that it's like you get to be on a deathbed and like where you can like have a peaceful contemplative death. If you have that opportunity to think about your life before you die in the hours or days before, you will be focused on your life and the passing of your life. And you're not going to really be giving like, damn, like I wish my neighbor would have been able to go to college the way he wanted to. Yeah. Maybe you will. Maybe you'll have this huge fucking psychedelic like thing where it's like everyone's desires are yours and everyone's hopes and dreams are yours because now you're part of the universe, but I doubt it.
No, probably not. But in that same respect, that same respect, there will be a part of me that will say, maybe if I had spoken to my mother a little bit differently, I could have made her happier in her life. Right. But that still goes back to my own need for...
That's your mother.
Yeah, it's my mother. That's not your mother. That's my mother. Yeah. That's not, this person's mother. That's not, it's always the personal. And I get it, but I also understand. It's that degree of understanding your own self-importance, but also having empathy, knowing that it's not an isolated thing. And that's what you get. This whole thing goes back to Chappelle's understanding of this is the Black experience. Why he said, why was it so easy for Bruce Jenner to change his gender, but Cassius Clay took all this shit for changing his fucking name? Now you could argue that was 50 years ago. But
60 years ago.
60 years ago, but Rip Van Nigger. Go to sleep for 100 years, wake up, nothing has changed. I mean, there is that element to it. That's why that joke continues to be important to me and to you, is that it's such a fucking ridiculous thing to say that is so on point. The man was ahead of his time in the same way that Carlin was ahead of his time. Rogan is lagging. And Chappelle, I don't know.
This is kind of like we have a few moments for a couple other films to go down those rabbit holes, because this is all what this is about. It's just the rabbit holes that this brings out that are current shit reflected through movies from way before and the episodes that we talked about. some, it's like, is Rogan? I mean, Rogan is definitely of his time.
Yeah.
But there are also those elements that would want to take us back, and this is the kind of like the Kamala Harris, like marketing, like slogan right now is kind of like, we're not going back. There are definitely, you know, these Project 2025 people or whatever, that, and you know, because the next in the lineup, episode 384, we did the 50s, you know, post-war paranoia. And there are those who would want us to go back, you know, the black experience, the woman experience, all of these other experiences to include, like, now if you get into like the trans and all that other stuff, it's like, well, people that are so marginal that they have to remain in the shadows, or in the closet, or whatever metaphor you want to use. You know, the era of fucking the Red Scare, of McCarthyism, of Father Knows Best, of Leave It to Beaver. There's that, you know what I mean? And as far away as that seems, it's kind of still, it's Rip Van America at that point, because it's kind of like we're still dealing with Russia, but in a different, fucking completely different take, because on the one side of the aisle is like, well, there's this fucking threat that is actually waging a war in Europe, you know?
Yeah.
And then there's the other side that's like, well, the leader of the Russian nation is more red-blooded American fucking macho man than fucking like these soft fucking Democrats on that side. You know what I mean? Like, so it's interesting to even just to look at it, and I'm sure we talked about a lot of this shit like 2 years ago, when we did this episode.
Yeah.
May of 2022. We're August of 24 right now, and it's I don't remember when the war in Ukraine started, but it's kind of like, damn, how things are the same, and how things are kind of, you know, history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, you know what I mean? Like, so there's definitely that, and the idea of, you know, Godzilla and the monster that comes from the depths, that creates fear. And on one side, it's like, to the Japanese, Godzilla is America. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So, all interesting, paranoid things to listen to if you want to go back to enjoy that.
Well, I think it's important too. I think it's, you know, Carlin. The weird thing is that Carlin. You know the weird thing that Carlin, Rogan, and Donald Trump all have in common? They all believed that the media was bullshit and they were lying. But it was a different take on it.
Which is also what you mentioned, Noam Chomsky. He also is, you know, manufacturing consent. There's also that. Yeah.
So you have to... It's the intent behind the lie. I mean... Carlin and Chomsky would argue, I think, you know, if I understand it correctly, I know my view of Carlin's take on that was they lie to you to scare you and to keep you in your place. He had a great joke about there's three classes in this society. The very rich to pay none of the taxes, do none of the work. The middle class, who pay all of the taxes, do none of the work, and the poor, who are just there to scare the shit out of the middle class. Keep them going to those fucking jobs. That's on point. That's real. Now, Rogan would say, he's just grunting up there, you know. Who's to believe that? Who's to believe that? Anthony Fauci, you know, and it's always after the fact. Well, after the fact, with masks and the shutdown, nobody knew. And who's to say that those actions didn't save lives? I don't know. Trump, on the other hand,
you mean the actions of what of wearing masks and stuff like that?
Wearing masks, shutting the schools down, maybe we would have been okay if they had kept the schools open and we didn't have to wear masks. Maybe we would have been okay, but we don't know. We were dealing with, number one, we don't know how many lives that might have saved. Secondly, we don't know what it would have been like if we hadn't done it.
I mean,
and in certain situations,
you can do an actuarial like analysis of like, okay, like this is the rate of people that were dying, and I mean, I don't know how to do the math on that, but I mean, like it just goes into like, what are the rates of transmission? What is each circumstance in each city or each like sector that you're studying? If you have sectors that are similar enough, and one is using masks and like mandates and one isn't, you can see the differences. And from that, you can extrapolate like, well, it appears that this, based on that, like this city did worse in terms of like casualties. I mean, at a certain point, it's like, I've heard the number thrown out there that it's like 3,000 people a day were dying. I mean, like, it's not like you can just completely shrug your shoulders and say like, who fucking knows? I mean, like, people in medical settings wear masks. They do it for a reason.
And they do it
people
for a reason. They know.
Fucking hands. Like, people wash their hands before surgery for a fucking reason. Polio was almost like completely eradicated because of fucking vaccine. You know what I mean? Like, and you have places where shit's coming back now, like in Gaza. Like,
well, that's the thing, is that
the thing as immunology, like in germ theory, like this is a science. We know these things.
But the fact of the matter is that neither you nor I nor the average American is
correct.
Is not. Let's not say intelligent enough, but not educated enough in that type of medical education, intelligence, practice.
Training
in order to understand it. So, at a certain point, you have to give yourself over to the so-called experts. I didn't mind wearing a mask. I didn't like wearing a mask. I didn't enjoy it, but I wasn't one of these people like, fuck that. This is my freedom, and I need to be out here doing. You need to shut the fuck up. You need to shut the fuck up. You know,
that's when people talk about privilege. Like, that's what that is. Where it's kind of like, what you mean? Like, I have to fucking like. I have to be uncomfortable because I have to think about somebody else. Why?
Yeah, I think that's the short-sightedness, and I think you have to make concessions every once in a while. And it's like I don't know. It would have been interesting to know what Carlin would have said about that. Now, likewise, what I started to say, the lies that the media tells, him, Chomsky, Rogan's take on it, or Donald Trump's use of that statement, enemy of the people, to use all of that shit to demonize media as a means of propping himself up. That's not something that Carlin or Chomsky are doing or did. That's not something that Rogan did. To tell you the truth, Rogan's not bright enough for that. Donald Trump did that in order to scare the shit out of people and further his own agenda.
Well, I think also Rogan is, and I think a lot of people are doing that because if they sense that, that there is an appeal that can be made to their audience, because if they notice that, like, a demographic kind of like, if they understand that, like, for example, or let's say this Lex Friedman. I don't know if you're familiar with him. He's another podcaster. They'll have like supposedly like random people, but then they have like way more right-leaning guests or controversial guests. These guests are going to get more views because they're fucking Andrew Tate. If Andrew Tate is like trending and Andrew Tate is fucking like saying all this fucked up shit, or if it's Kanye West is saying all this crazy shit, like, and he's talking about how he wants to buy the earth, people are going to be like, wait, what? What is that? And so they're going to get views. This is the attention economy. So it's like, you're going to click on that. And by having that person on there and allowing them to fucking say all this shit, you're less likely to challenge them. And you're more likely to allow them to just fucking keep talking and indulge those people so that you yourself can get fucking more money, because that's ultimately what it is. I think that's kind of the Chomsky argument, is that like, well, yeah, it's all about, especially in those like in at that time, it was still like the world was still like an advertising, ad revenue driven kind of media. Trump is using it in terms of like a propagandistic, like he's saying media, but he's also saying mainstream media. But then he goes on Fox News. Fox News is mainstream media.
Yeah.
Fox News is News Corp. Fox News is Rupert Murdoch. Fox News is the same company that's like Wall Street Journal. Like it's kind of like, come on, like these are major news outlets. Whether they're engaged in what you would consider traditional news or not, they're still news outlets, even if they're entertainment or opinion or editorial pieces. So when Fox News talks about, the mainstream media, what they mean is like they're talking about the Democrat channel. You know what I mean? Or MSNBC, which leans left, HuffPost, which leans left. You can look all this shit up on like Media Bias and these different sites that'll show you who owns what and what, Chomsky is talking about, like, okay, these are like the 5 companies that own these different fucking channels, and this is how they're making their money. Yeah. And it goes back to the whole going into the post-war paranoia thing. It's like, well, the idea, and Carlin would get in on that, is that like, well, you're more compliant if you're afraid. Yeah. News is meant to, as a form of, it's not necessarily to inform. It is also to entertain. It's to titillate. It's to freak you out. It's to do all these things. Look at the fucking car chase phenomenon, right? Rogan is a Spotify fucking millionaire. He's like, I mean, you could argue, I don't know the numbers, but let's just say he's the fucking #1 podcaster in the world, if not one of them. And I mean, how fucking mainstream is that? Like, that's the epitome of fucking mainstream. And even though he has like, his brand is, edgy fucking, like, whatever his personal bag is, which is like the UFC fucking black belt fucking from Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu mixed with psychedelics, mixed with ancient aliens, mixed with blah, 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 comedy and everything. It's still kind of like the type of guests that he gets. You need power and you need prestige and status in order to get them. Yeah. This is why other podcasters go on, like Patrick Bet David went on his channel giving him gifts, shamelessly, like giving him these gifts, begging him to put to interview Donald Trump, begging Joe Rogan to interview Donald Trump. And obviously it's like, well, then if that happens, then Patrick McDavid says, I got fucking Joe Rogan to interview Donald Trump. And it's all status and proximity to status, right? Yeah. So it's like, when it comes to that, it's in contrast to Carlin, I think, #1, Carlin doesn't have like he's using material to comment and critique culture, not necessarily just to capitalize on whatever topics are at hand. And the idea of punching up versus punching down, I don't think we've really talked about that. I don't know how familiar you are with those terms.
No. I know them.
Yeah, you know them. So it's like, I feel like Carlin was typically punching up. He was attacking, he was speaking truth to power. He was typically attacking not like the average person. If you were to attack or critique the average person, he would probably critique typically the worst aspects of what he felt was consumer American culture. Yeah. And kind of like a Wall-E type of entitled. He would basically attack the kind of person from the mini marts, the mini malls, all that shit
Mhm.
in the SUV, who would not want to fucking wear a mask because he was too busy shoveling whatever fucking AM, PM, 7-Eleven food in his mouth or whatever. While at the same time critiquing, as you said, the potential of infinite like levels of absurdity of continuing to add like all of these different variables to pronouns, etc. While at the same time critiquing those people, but also the people that are super fucking offended by it.
Yeah.
Or pretend to be offended by it. You know what I mean? Like these evangelicals and all that shit. So it's interesting that we've gone from fucking, just in this episode, we've gone from the hard-boiled 40s, the cynicism, through fucking One Night in Miami, the kind of like political mashup, though cynical or is it real fucking Jim Carrey shit, the personal, who's gonna give a fuck of Southgate, about Southgate, like, but the personal is universal, to the fucking paranoia of 50s, but also fucking all under the roof of kind of like what would George Carlin think or say about what was happening, and a kind of like this weird kind of wish fan fiction, like in the same way that Trump is wishing that Biden was still running, like we're wishing that Carlin were here to fucking talk about all this.
Well, there is something to that where it's like, yeah, I hear it all the time. What would Carlin say? Well, Carlin's gone. Carlin said what he said, and you can extrapolate on that. And I'm not talking about fucking AI where they've done that. They've created an AI George Carlin to comment on the shit based on what he has said in the past. It's fucking creepy as shit. The idea of it is creepy as shit. I haven't listened to it. I don't want to listen to it. I refuse to listen to it.
That
I know you are.
right now.
You're saying, fuck.
And I'm going to make you listen to it.
But here's, you can fucking do what you got to do. The brilliance, and I think the importance, and maybe I give too much, maybe I'm one of those sheep that follow my heroes as well, but I think I do it differently, as every person who does this kind of thing probably would think they do it differently. What I learned from George Carlin gave me the courage to be a free thinker, and Chomsky did as well, with this idea of whatever. I think Chomsky, I remember Chomsky saying the role of the intellect in society is to take a step back when the consensus is forming. I like that. Basically,
that sounds like also like a Mark Twain type of perspective.
Yeah, it does. And Mark Twain, another great American mind. The point of it is, though, is you owe it to yourself and the species to not just go with what is being told to you in the way a Rogan fan might. And even those people who follow Carlin and Chomsky in that way, because there are those. But rather to look at a situation, look at the stupidity, the absurdity, the foolishness, whatever angle, the self-importance. When you asked about punching down, one of my favorite George Carlin jokes is that he was like, I go to a women's rights march. I just pull down my window and say, hey, which one of you hot little mamas wants to come home and make me a sandwich and give me a blowjob? He's like, come on, blowjob. And he's like, I hate anyone that takes himself too fucking seriously. And that's the truth. Yeah, hit them with the absurdity of their own rhetoric. You're not that important. You're not that big a deal. The species as a whole is a big deal. But when you start imagining that this is it, and this is all that it can be, and this is all we are capable of, or this is the only possibility that we could aspire to, that becomes the death of the species. And I think that's what Carlin was commenting on. It didn't matter about punching up or punching down. He usually, in the terms as they're described and they're used, 90% of the time, let's say 75% of the time, Carlin was punching up. But he wasn't afraid of hitting us. I believe that Carlin's attitude, much the same as mine is, when you cannot joke about a group of people, whether they're Latin, white, black, Asian, gay, women, when you can't joke about them and make a joke based on stereotype or whatever other kind of uncomfortable belief, we start to lose our humanity. You have to be able to laugh at the self.
The pushback of, let's say, on Ali, right out of fucking, out of Regina King's film, would be, and Ali and more, and then some, right?
Yeah.
Ali and all the others. I mean, come on, right? Fucking, or James Brown of like, I am somebody.
Yeah.
It's like, well, all of you have been doing has been laughing at me this whole fucking time.
That's true too.
And it's time for me to, like, it's not that I need to take myself so important. Maybe it is, because no one else is going to take me important. Everyone's been stepping on me this whole fucking time. And now it's time for me to stand up and fucking make it known that I do count and I do matter. And I'm not going to let you step on me anymore. And I'm not, as they're saying outside in the streets now, is like, I'm not going to go back. And they're saying that at the convention, and outside the convention, the Gaza protesters are like, well, we fucking matter too.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And, and so it's kind of like, that's the pushback. But beyond all that, I remember the Mark Twain quote, or the paraphrase or whatever, is that whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to reform or pause and reflect.
Yeah. And that's the importance of it, is you don't want to be a part of something, because whenever there is a group, there is a gathering, there is a consensus forming, there's a lack of thought behind it. Or there is such a singular thought that nobody is listening to anybody else. If you're taking other people's experience into account and you're allowing that to shape, to a degree, what you think, if you practice empathy, you come to a better understanding, but that takes more work. And all Carlin was doing was commenting on it, because he saw it as hopeless. And I think there's validity to that. I think at a certain point you have to recognize that this species, this experiment is coming to an end. I don't mean to be all doom and gloom, and I don't mean to be, but, the fucking dinosaurs, the American dream. Yeah. But did it ever really exist outside of just being a dream?
American carnage.
Yeah.
I mean, that's what Carlin said, right?
Yeah.
It's a dream because you have to be asleep to believe it.
Yeah.
And that's a hell of a lot more than 7 words.
Yeah, it is.
So this is an interesting current event / fucking 4 or 5 episode fucking like rabbit hole that we went down.
And the fact is that we're never going to stop going back to this well. We will always go back to this well, because it is the foundation of who we are, you and I in this episode, and the culture as a whole. It affects us. It plays a major part in our identity, in our beliefs, whether for or against. I will never stop going back to this well?
There's a lot to draw from, you know what I mean, and to continue. This episode was sponsored by the Joe Rogan Experience. buymeacoffee.com/WatchRickRamos. All funds will be filtered through us and given to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
And ultimately,
We are supporters.
To Donald Trump and the Republican Party and all of his and our handlers. Thank you very much. This episode is dedicated to someone. Goodbye.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye now.